every man prepared to perform exploits which, we felt sure, would astonish the rest of the regiment, of the army, and of France. Forward! 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 The troops had already ridden past the Colonel at an easy gallop, and we suddenly found ourselves strangely isolated in that vast tract of country which a few minutes before we had passed over in a body. There was a succession of yellow and green fields, with here and there some leafy thicket. On our left, surrounded by orchards, rose the grey and massive buildings of the farm of Belair. In front of us, some few hundred yards off, there was a dark line of wood, the lower part of which was hidden from us by a slight rise in the ground. Hardly had the first troop reached the top of the brow when some shots were fired at us. We at once understood. Again we were to be deprived of the pleasure of measuring ourselves with the Uhlans at close quarters. We saw distinctly on the edge of the wood, kneeling and ready to fire, some 50 sharpshooters in grey uniform and round caps with peaks. We recognised them easily. It was one of their cyclist detachments that had slipped into the wood and had been quietly waiting for us with rifles levelled. As usual, their cavalry had retired under the cover of their line. What did it matter to us? The wood was not thick enough to prevent our horses from getting through, and the temptation to let the fellows have a taste of our steel was too strong. I rejoiced at the thought of seeing their heavy boots scuttle away through the trees. I resolved to have a thrust at the skirts of their tunics, to help them on a bit. The Captain understood the general feeling. "Form up!" he cried. In a twinkling a moving wall had been formed, to the music of merrily clinking stirrups and scabbards and jangling metal, and the gallop towards the wood began. Just at that moment its skirts were outlined by a circle of fire, and a violent fusillade rang out. Bullets whistled in all directions, and behind me I heard the heavy sound of men and horses falling on the hard ground. In my troop a horse without a rider broke away and came galloping towards me. What did it matter? Forward! Forward! We were about 200 yards off. We spurred our horses and got into our stride. Suddenly a horrible fear took the place of the martial joy that had urged us to the fight. We were all struck by the same discouragement, the same feeling of impotence, the same conviction of the uselessness of our sacrifice. We had just realised that the edge of the wood was surrounded with wire, and that it was behind this impassable barrier that the Prussians were calmly firing at us as at a target. What was to be done? How could we get at them and revenge our fellows who had fallen? For one second a feeling of horror and impotent rage passed, like a deep wave, over the squadron. The bullets whistled past us. But the Captain adopted the wisest course. He saw that retreat was necessary. He had behind him more than 100 human lives, and felt they must be saved for better and more useful sacrifices. With a voice that rose above the noise of the firing, he shouted, "Follow me, in open order!" And he spurred in an oblique direction towards the nearest depression in the ground. But the movement was badly carried out. The men, disheartened, instead of spreading out like a flight of sparrows, rushed off in so compact a body that some more horses were knocked over by the Prussian bullets. How long had those few seconds seemed to us? I wondered by what sort of miracle it was that we did not lose more men. But what an uncanny tune the innumerable bullets made in our ears as they pursued us like angry bees. At last we got under cover. Following a gully, the squadron reached a little wood, behind which it was able to reform. The sweating horses snorted loudly. The men, sullen-mouthed and dejected, fell in without a word and dressed the line. In the fading light the roll was called by a non-commissioned officer in a subdued voice, whilst I looked on distressfully at the sad results of the useless charge. And yet our losses were not great. 3 troopers only, slightly wounded, who, far from grumbling at their mishap, seemed proud of the blood that stained their tunics and their hands. The men whose horses had fallen had already come up jogging heavily over the field of lucerne that stretched out before us. One man alone was absent, Paquin, a good little fellow, energetic and well disciplined, whose good humour I found especially attractive both under fire and in camp. But he would come in, no doubt. Calhard, his bedfellow, told me that his horse had stumbled and thrown him. He thought he had even seen him get up directly after the charge had passed.
Mon Lieutenant, your horse is wounded."
I had dismounted in a moment, and tears came to my eyes. I had forgotten the anger and impatience that Tourne Toujours' savage temper had so often caused me. What had they done to my brave and noble companion in arms? A bullet had struck him inside the left thigh, and penetrating it had made a horrible wound as large as my hand, from which the blood was streaming all down his leg. 2 other bullets had hit him, one in the flank and the other in the loins, leaving 2 small red holes. The noble animal had brought me safely back, and then, as he still stood on 4 trembling legs, his neck raised, his nostrils dilated, his ears pricked, he fixed his eyes on the distance and seemed to look approaching death in the face. Poor Tourne-Toujours! You could not divine the pain I felt as I patted you gently as I should touch a little suffering child. But I had to shake off the sadness that wrung my heart. The day was gradually sinking, and Paquin had not come in. 2 of the men quickly put my saddle on the horse of one of the wounded troopers, while Surgeon Major P., in the growing dusk, attended to the seriously wounded men stretched on the grass. I made up my mind to go out and see whether my little Chasseur was not lying out on the scene of the charge. "Cahard, Finet, Monet, Valley, I want you." At a gentle trot we sallied out from the cover of the wood. My 4 men dispersed at wide intervals to the right and left, stood up in their stirrups from time to time to get a better view. The guns were silent. Now and again 1 or 2 isolated shots were heard. Night had almost fallen. On the horizon a long reddish streak of light still gave a feeble glow. Everything was becoming blurred and mysterious. In front of us stretched the disquieting mass of the wood that so lately had rained death on us. Above our heads flocks of black birds were wheeling and croaking. "Paquin! Paquin! Paquin!" My Chasseurs shouted their comrade's name, but no voice answered. We were certainly on the ground the squadron had ridden over. Every now and then we came across the body of a horse, marking our mournful course. A poor mare with a broken leg neighed feebly, as if appealing for help to her stable companions. "Paquin! Paquin! Paquin!" No response. We had to turn back and rejoin the others. War has many of these moments of pain when we have to control our feelings, forget those we love, those who are suffering, those who are dying, and think of nothing but our regiment, our squadron, our troop. Paquin's name would be marked on the roll as missing, a solemn word which means so many things, a word that leaves a little hope but gives rise to so many fears.
Over the fields, under a brilliant moon, the squadron retired in silence.
Those who have served in war know that solemn moment when, after a day's fighting, each corpse arrives at its appointed place of rest. It is the moment when in normal life nature falls asleep in the peace of the evening. It is the moment when in villages and farms lights appear in the lower windows behind which the family is seated around a steaming soup tureen after the day's work. It is some time now since we have tasted the exquisite peace of those moments.
Instead,
we have grown used to hearing over a wide country a monotonous and barbarous uproar caused by the thousands of cannon, limbers, vans, and vehicles of every kind which are the very life of an army. All these things rumble along methodically in the dark, clanking and creaking, towards a goal invisible and yet sure. Above this huge chaos, voices rise in various keys. Soldiers astray, asking for their road, van drivers urging on their footsore teams, words of command given by leaders striving in the dark to prevent confusion among their units. This is the reverse of the shield of battle, the moment when we feel weariness of mind and body, and the infinite sadness of remembering those who are no more. Away in the distance 2 villages were in flames, luridly lighting up some corners of the scene. That evening seemed to me sadder and more distressing than ever.
End of chapter 2. Recording by FNH. Visit www.bookranger.co.uk.